My name's Craig Rowland. I'm a program manager in the Hardware Developer Experience Group. Thanks for joining us this morning. It's great to see you on the last day of build. If you're like me, your brain is full and it kind of hurts a little bit. I'll try to go easy on that and give you just some key points to remember in addition to all the detail that we have in the presentation. This is kind of a weird room. I see you guys all went to the sides where the big screens are, and that's fine. You guys are actually kind of hard for me to see because I've got all these monitors over here. So if I'm not looking at you, I'm not ignoring you. It's just kind of hard with all this equipment up here. Anyway, great to see you guys this morning. My purpose is simple. I get to introduce you to something new. If my clicker works. There we go. I get to introduce you to the Hardware Certification Kit. If you've done hardware certification before, you might guess that this is a rebranding of the Windows Logo Kit. If that's your guess, you're kind of right. You're in the right ballpark at least. This will replace the Windows Logo Kit when it's available. However, it's really more than just a simple rebranding. It's an entire rethinking or reimagining of the way that hardware certification works. I'm going to introduce you to the kit through a series of demos. Each demo will focus on a different new feature of the kit. As we do that, we'll encounter some new concepts as well, and when that happens, I'll stop and explain those to you at that time. This is a diagram that you've probably seen before in one form or another. It's just the typical product lifecycle diagram. In fact, you've probably seen exactly this picture already at this conference. We've used it in a number of different presentations. Obviously, we're going to focus on that bottom left-hand corner and talk about certification today. Before we do that, though, I want to acknowledge something. I've had the opportunity to work with many of you at events like this, at our Logo Fest events, and at other events. I've had the opportunity to be in many of your labs and work side by side with you testing devices. One of the things you've told me very clearly is, Craig, when I get to the point that I'm doing certification testing, I just expect stuff to work because we built all the quality and the requirements into the product early in the product cycle. We thought about it when we were designing. We thought about it when we were implementing. We have QA processes to make sure it's done right, and certification should be something that just works at the end. I get that. And even though we're going to focus on the certification testing today, I want you to know that there is work that has been done to move this stuff upstream. The logo requirements themselves have been enhanced significantly so that every requirement has a pointer to the Windows features and scenarios that they're lighting up, that they're making possible. In addition, every test that's in the kit now has a pointer directly to the requirements that it's validating. So it's easy for you to see the relevance of these requirements and how we're using them in Windows. Also, we've put a number of the certification tests right in the driver kit, along with a lightweight execution engine, so that your driver developers have these tests available to them right in Visual Studio in a way that's easy for them to use, so they don't have to deal with the overhead of the certification testing process and tools, and they could use it throughout the development process. So we are focusing on certification, and I hope what we're getting closer to is the point where that certification testing is really just a final stamp of approval, a final stamp of quality on your products. I'm going to talk about a lot of different features and concepts today. If you forget all the details, I'd like you to keep just two things in your head as you leave this afternoon and head home. Because all of the features and concepts are designed to do one of two things. And this is the first thing. The Hardware Certification Kit is designed to be a tool to help you deliver quality hardware for Windows that fulfills customer expectations. Those last three words are worthy of a little bit of conversation. During planning, those of us who work on certification in the Windows organization spent a lot of time talking about and thinking about quality and asking, what is quality? How do we improve quality in the ecosystem? How do we make sure that consumers get quality devices? There were a couple of things that stood out to us in those discussions. One is that quality is a multifaceted thing. It's not one thing. It's about performance, it's about reliability, it's about stability, it can be about features, it can be about security, it can be about many different things. The second thing that stood out to us about quality is it's context sensitive. It depends upon what the expectations of the user are at that time, in that moment, and what the needs of the user are at that time. So based on that, we came up with this definition of quality that says, quality is about fulfilling customer expectations. So when you read this statement, what you should be reading is, the hardware certification kit is a tool to help you deliver quality hardware to your customers. How many of you had the opportunity to see Oscar's certification program overview yesterday? All right, maybe only half. So I will give you the quick nutshell version of that. Oscar talked about the certification program goals, and he highlighted 3 high-level goals for us. The first was great experiences, and he gave a really good example. If you're developing a webcam, when your customer buys a webcam, they're not buying a camera. They're buying the ability to chat with grandma who lives across the country in a video format. That's what they're really buying. And it's those great experiences that we want to deliver because it's those experiences that customers spend money on. That's why we've taken every requirement and mapped it right up to a Windows feature and scenario so that it's clear what it is we're trying to deliver in the product. In order to deliver that scenario, we need Windows plus your hardware. You can't do it with one or the other. You need them both, and you need them to work together. And that's what we're trying to achieve with the certification program. The second goal that Oscar talked about was broad and timely availability. This is about making sure that when Windows 8 is on the shelf and a customer goes to the store to buy it, there's also your hardware on the shelf so that they can get that experience that they want. At the end of the presentation, I'll talk a little bit about how we're going to help align everybody so that we get to that point when Windows 8 is available in the stores. The last thing that Oscar talked about is a streamlined certification experience. And obviously that's where we're going to spend most of our time today. Oscar had a number of quotes from all of you about the current state of our tools and the quality of the experience. I like seeing those quotes. Most of them don't make me feel great about the current product. But the reason I like seeing them is as I think about the scenarios and the features that I'll show you today, I can look at every one of those and I get this image of being in a shooting gallery and just kind of going pew, pew, and shooting everyone down. So I hope that by the time we're done with the demos, you'll agree that we've achieved that. Oscar promised better tools, which begs the question to me, better how? This is the answer. The hardware certification kit enables a clear and direct path to certification. This is the second major point that I'd like you to try to keep in your head. We're trying to give you a tool for delivering quality hardware. We're trying to give you a tool that enables you to do that in a clear and direct way. My team wants the certification process to be as simple and straightforward and easy as possible for you so that you can spend your time and resources building better hardware and delivering better scenarios. When I think about the features I'm going to show you today, I have in my mind an image of a broad boulevard, sort of like Harbor Boulevard out here on the street, where you've got multiple lanes, there aren't any detours, there aren't any roadblocks. You've just got a bunch of green lights that all turn green at the same time. And I'm hoping that that's what you'll see in these features. Okay, so we're about to get into the demos. There are a couple things I want to ask you to keep in mind as we go into the demos. The first thing is this. There are more features, more new features in this kit than I could possibly show you in the 45 minutes or so that I have available. So you're going to get just a taste. This is like that 1-ounce sampler that you get at the winery before you buy the case. There are opportunities to learn more. There are opportunities right here today to learn more. We have a lab that's in the back of the expo hall in Hall D. You can go back there and put your hands on the product and use it yourself. You can sit on the couch and talk with experts and ask all the questions that you have. There's also, at the end of the day, if you're sticking it out to the bitter end with us, a chalk talk with some experts from the certification programs. That's another opportunity to ask questions and get answers. And then at the end of the presentation, I'll give you some pointers to where you can do more in-depth analysis and then get more in-depth understanding of the product after the conference is over. The second thing I'd like to ask you to keep in mind as we go into the demos is this. This is a very different way of doing hardware certification. And because of that, I see people often make a mistake, or at least do something that directs them into a weird place. What they do is they say, I used to do this in the old kit. How do I do that in the new kit? And that question really doesn't work because the concepts are different. It's a bit like taking that new Windows 8 PC that you have and asking, how do I pin something to the start menu? The answer is really, you don't. And so I suggest that as you look at these demos and as you start working with the product, you ask yourself a different question. It's a simple question, but it's important. Ask yourself, how do I take my product and use this kit to get it certified? And if you ask that simple question, you should get an answer that gives you a clear path from A to B, because that's exactly how we design the features. All right, so finally into the demos. The first thing I want to talk about is the streamlined user experience. As we develop the features for this kit, like any other feature team, we thought deep and hard about our users, and it's useful to divide you into buckets. One of the useful buckets is to think about how often do you do certification of hardware? There's a large group of you that certify hardware only once in a great while, maybe less than 6 times a year. If that's you, what you need is a UI that's intuitive. You need something that guides you down the path, that points you in the direction of the next step. You need something that doesn't require a lot of prior knowledge or understanding in order to be successful. And that's exactly how we've designed the UI to work. There's a second major group of you who do certification testing more or less all the time. It might actually be your full-time job. And if that's you, you become very expert and very productive with the tool in a reasonably short period of time. What you need is something that's efficient, something that gets you from point A to point B in a rapid manner so that you're not wasting your time doing unnecessary stuff. In designing this UI, we created something new from scratch. We started with a flow chart of the certification process, and we tailored a UI that fits that exactly. And then we looked for places that we could take steps out. So this is a UI that's designed to make that group of users much more efficient. All right, so now if I can figure out one more thing before we do the demo. Don't look too closely at this particular slide. If you see a big fuzzy group of UI on the left and a smaller fuzzy group of UI on the right, that's more than enough for this discussion. The point I wanted to show you here is just a demonstration of the type of streamlining that we've done. On the left is some UI that is required to do a typical certification of a piece of hardware today. There's roughly 12 pieces of UI that you need to know and use to be successful. On the right is the same pieces of UI, or the only pieces of UI, that you need to know and understand to be successful in the new kit and accomplish the same scenario. We've cut the amount of UI that you have to work with in half, at least. And in addition to that, the UI is much cleaner. It's free of clutter. It doesn't have unnecessary stuff in it. It just has the stuff that you need to accomplish certification testing. We've also analyzed the processes that you go through in certification testing, and in most cases for core certification scenarios, we're cutting anywhere from 40 to 60% of the steps that you have to go through out by automating things and being intelligent about how we do things. I'll show you some examples of that when we get into the demos. All right, so now we're ready to demo. Let's see if I can make this equipment work. Yes? No? I think the machine's asleep, probably. that wake it up. There we go. Okay, so welcome to the new user experience for the hardware certification kit. In this first demo, what we're going to do is become familiar with the user experience, with the new UI. I'm going to do that by walking through a very brief demo. We're going to go through the process of certifying a system for Windows. And this is where you will always start when the application opens. You'll notice that already we're guiding the user in the right direction. In order to do anything, the first thing I need to do is create a project. And it turns out that from here, really creating a project is just about the only thing I can do. The rest of this stuff is disabled at this point. So I'll click this button that says Create a Project, and I'll give it a name. And that's all there is. I've created my project. Now I can move over to this Selection tab, and I need to pick a machine pool. For those of you who are familiar with the logo kit, machine pools haven't changed at all. They work exactly the way they did before. For those of you who are not familiar, machine pools are just logical groupings of machines in the lab for management purposes. I have a very simple lab here. This machine on the bottom is the controller. It runs Server 2008 R2. That's what you're seeing up there on the screen. There's a UX component that is running on that server as well. I could run that UX component remotely on any machine that has network connectivity here, but this is where all of the automation and the intelligence of the kit resides. This machine on top is the machine I'm going to run my tests on. This is running Windows 8 Developer Preview. I could have up to 100 of these things in my lab, and that's why machine pools can be useful, to have some grouping for those purposes. But today I've just got the one machine to run tests on. So now that I've picked that, I've got these different filters over here, and because I'm doing a system submission, I'm going to pick systems. And I'll see a list of all the systems that are in my lab, or at least in the machine pool that I've picked. And as we've talked about, there's only one to pick from today. There's the name of that machine. This is the operating system that's running on the machine. I'm going to pick that machine, and it's going to look at the data that's on the controller about that particular client. When you install the client, we run a bunch of gatherers that collect data about this machine and serve it up to the controller. The controller is now looking at that data to determine what tests should be run against this system. And once it does that, then it will populate this list of tests here. Notice that I didn't have to tell it what operating system I was certifying for. It looked at the client and said, you know what, this is Windows 8. I guess you want to certify for Windows 8. Notice I didn't have to tell it what architecture I wanted to certify for. We know what architecture that machine is, so rather than ask you, we'll just figure it out. So that's an example of how we're eliminating some steps from the process. Really all you need to know as a user at this point now is I need to run all these tests and get passing results for them to certify my device. You'll see a summary of that over here. There's 61 tests in total that I need to run. And if I wanted to, I could simply click this box up here at the top and click Run Selected and go over to Disneyland for the rest of the day and come back and see what the results were at the end of the day. We don't have that much time. So instead, I'm just going to run one test today. I'm going to run this audio logo test. And it turns out this test is actually going to make this client make some noise. It's louder in this room than I expected, but at least you'll know that it's working. So down at the bottom, you see some progress about that individual test. If I were to move to a different test, I wouldn't see that progress. That progress is specifically about that particular test. There's an icon here that tells me it's running, and there's some more detail here about the status of that test. It's in the queue. It takes a minute for the system to figure out where that thing needs to go and push it out to the client. While it's doing that, we can walk over here to the Results tab. So as tests complete, you're going to see the results of those show up here on this tab. Now you can tell that the test is running. On the Results tab, I can drill into the individual tasks of this job and see what it's doing. And once it's complete, I'll see a result. You see the little spinny blue icons are telling me that's a process that hasn't yet finished. The check marks are processes that finished and we got the result that we wanted, a passing result. The red X's are results that say, hey, something failed. And this particular job happens to fail. So I can drill into here. I'm not sure what happened, but I can look at the log. I can double-click on this log, and it's going to open up in a viewer so I can analyze this thing and figure out why did this thing fail. And there's a lot of detail in here, and I'm not going to try to figure that out right now. We might come back to it later and see if we can figure it out. So that's the demo for the UI. Hopefully you're seeing how it's intuitive, how it's guiding you to the next step. Hopefully you're seeing how for an experienced user it's going to make you more efficient. Let's go ahead then, where did I put my clicker? And move on to the next feature. The next feature we want to talk about is the feature-based infrastructure. All of you that make up the hardware ecosystem, you're very good at creating innovative devices. That creates a bit of a challenge for us from a certification perspective, though. So we want to look at a device like this and say, this is a printer. A printer does the following things. And then that way, then we can figure out, we can look at the printer and determine, is it doing it correctly? The problem is, you guys do stuff like this. You create this printer, and then you give it the ability to scan and fax. There's some storage here. There's some card readers. There's a network card. There's a USB hub, I believe. That's a challenge for us. The solution to this is feature-based infrastructure. What we're doing in the new kit is instead of saying, let's define a bunch of little boxes and try to get our hardware industry to fit into those boxes, we said, let's build an infrastructure, a system that's flexible enough to take a look at a new innovative product from one of you, and even if it's something we haven't seen before, figure out how to certify that thing. And the way we do that is we look at the capabilities of the device, we figure out what Windows features and scenarios it's supporting, and then we make sure that it implements those scenarios and supports those scenarios correctly. And we'll take a look at how we do that in some detail here shortly. Sorry, I'm forgetting to advance the slides. Good. As a sort of a side benefit of that, it also makes the logo testing or the certification testing much more relevant to you. So you can see the individual tests in the kit. You know if they're passing or failing. You know which requirements they're validating, and you know which Windows scenarios those are supporting. So it should make it clear to you what it is we're doing and why. So here's how this works. This is a typical device that you would probably call a desktop printer. Any consumer would call this a desktop printer, and think of it as one product. And I believe you would think of it as one product too. But in the current certification environment, we say that's not one product. That's a printer, that's a scanner, that's a fax machine, that's a storage device, that's a card reader, and we make you test each of those functions individually. Instead, we're going to look at this, and you'll see in the demo in just a minute, as a product. We're going to work with it the way that you think of it and the way that your consumers, your customers think about it, as a printer. In addition to that, that also gives us the ability to test the device on multiple different operating systems and multiple different architectures, all as one project. So in the past, we would have had 5 times 3 times 2, at least 30 different projects that you would have had to create in the logo kit. Today, in the new kit, we'll treat this as one thing. We'll do one project to certify the whole device on multiple architectures, multiple operating systems. All right, so let's take a look at the demo. I need to push buttons. Okay, so creating this new project is no different from creating a system project. We'll just click Create Project again, and we'll call this one the printer demo. And you'll notice that once the project is loaded up and ready to go, you'll see the title of the project or the name of the project up here in the title bar. We'll go to the Selection tab, and since this is a printer, I will use this Devices and Printers view. And I'm going to see down here my Epson printer. This is the one that's sitting right here on the table. Okay? A little bit of concepts or terminology. I'm going to call this thing a product because that's how I think of it, and I think that's how your consumers think of it. Your product, however, is made up of multiple dev nodes in most cases if it's a complex product like this. And we talk about those dev nodes in terms of targets. We're going to refer to them as targets because we're targeting tests against those. You can actually see the targets that we've detected on this device by going to this other option that says Show Selected. It's up here on the top if you missed me clicking away up here. So here I can see the various dev nodes that make up this product and implement the features of this product. This bottom one down here happens to be the class driver that's implementing the basic function of printing in this device. This one up here happens to be the scanning functionality of this device. So you can see those right here. I'm only connected via IP right now for the purposes of this demo to keep it simple. But if I were to connect this printer via USB, you would see a number of other functions enumerate on this device as well. And the kit's able to handle a device that's connected in multiple ways just like that. This isn't necessary to do or even to know, but you can see what features have been detected on this particular dev node. These are the Windows features and the logo or certification requirements that are mapped to them. You can see that we're detecting some dev fund requirements or dev fund features. These are features that you should expect to see on virtually every dev node. They're features that just ensure that the drivers are implemented basically correctly. If you scroll down the list a little further, you'll see the imaging requirements or features that we have detected on this device as well. So there's the basic scanning functionality that we've detected on the device. And we can tell you exactly which jobs are mapped up to that feature. So again, not necessary for you guys to see that or do anything with it or even understand it, but it's useful to understand what's going on under the covers here, under the hood. We looked at your printer. We determined what dev nodes it was implementing. We figured out what features came from those dev nodes. And based on that, we've generated a list of tests that need to run against this device to make sure that it's working properly. Now you can see from the summary, we've got obviously a much larger list of tests for this complex device than we did for a system. You can see them over there in the summary. And notice you're going to see multiple instances of some tests. Why is this? It's because we have to run some tests against every dev node. These dev fund requirements are a good example. Those are requirements that every driver should meet. So if you have multiple dev nodes, you're probably going to run those things multiple times. You can see which dev node we're running against in this column right here. So for demo purposes, I'm going to go ahead and run this one job. Just check it in the box and click Run Selected, no different from what we did before. And you can see the hourglass there telling you that, yep, we've got that thing scheduled. You can see the detail down at the bottom about what's going on. While that's running, it gives us an opportunity to talk about the summary pane a little bit more. You see that it's updating in real time. So we're seeing one test is running. I didn't have to do anything to refresh that. Just as soon as that job was scheduled, the summary pane got updated. That's not terribly useful here where we're running one job at a time. But if you were to batch all these up and run them, I think that would turn out to be useful to you. As tests complete, you're going to see the results there, and you're already seeing a passing result for this test. OSs and platforms. Recall that I told you previously we would be able to certify this device on multiple operating systems and multiple architectures as part of one project. If I wanted to do that, I have a couple of different choices. Number one, I could bring up, say I want to certify this on Windows 7 as well. I could bring another client in here, and I could attach this printer via IP to that client, and I would just pick that printer attached to that client and run the same set of tests against it. When I did that, what you would see is another OS platform listed here. You would see Windows 7 listed there. Obviously, I have other choices. If I had another copy of this printer, I could just attach that to another machine. So all we have to do is attach it to a number of different clients that are running the operating system and the architecture that we want to certify on. And you'll see clearly there in the summary pane which ones we found. And you can determine then from there which ones you need to add. Also, you'll always see the list of targets up here, so you have an idea which targets have been identified on your particular device. So again, just like the system certification, we move over to this results tab. We see the results. We can drill down through these and look at the logs. Not terribly interesting logs on a test that passed. Usually if it passed, we just ignore it and move on to something that needs our attention. So I'm going to leave that demo there. Hopefully you're seeing how this is going to help you in terms of certifying a multifunction device or a complex device. Hopefully you're seeing that it's a flexible system that now instead of asking you to make your device fit our system, we're going to have our system adapt to your device, even if it's something we haven't seen before. Okay, so we talked about the users who are doing a few submissions a year. We talked about those of you who are doing certification testing more or less all the time. There's a third group of you, and in terms of the number of companies, it's relatively small, but in terms of the amount of certification testing that's being done, it's very large. There are companies out there I know, I've seen their labs, I've been in them. They have literally hundreds of machines. They're doing nothing but certification testing on those machines all day long. And they have entire staffs of people that are doing certification testing. If that's you, what you need is automation. And I know you need automation because today in the kit we really don't offer it. We've got this incomplete automation interface. It's not really designed for certification testing. It's not supported by our product support organization. And yet many of you have figured out how to automate parts of the certification process. So I know that you need it. And that's what we're going to give you in the new kit. It's a complete automation infrastructure. It does everything that you can do through the UI. I absolutely guarantee that because there's nothing that the UI does today that doesn't go through our object model. You can use the object model directly in a fully documented and supported way. And it's very straightforward. As I go through the demo, you're going to see that using the automation infrastructure is not really significantly different from using the UI. The demo I'm going to do is we will take a simple C# app, and it will do essentially the same thing that I did in the previous demonstrations. It will create a project, select a target, and schedule some tests to run. So before we do that, let's take a quick look at the code so you know what's going on. As I said, it's very straightforward. The first thing I did in the demos was create a project. And you can see that one of the first things the app is doing is creating a project. And doing that isn't really different from doing it in the UI. I simply say create a project and I give it a name. That's all there is to it. The next thing that I did in the demos is I had to pick a target. That's what's happening here. This one probably needs a little bit of explanation. You see up there the hardware ID, it's the second line of code there after the comment, is ACPI PNP 0303. That's the hardware ID for this keyboard that's connected to the client here. Okay? So what I'm doing is I'm saying, go out and find all the hardware devices in my machine pool that match that hardware ID. And then later on, that bolded line, the second bolded line, is simply saying, pick the first item from that list. Now, obviously, this is just a demo app. I happen to know that in this particular demo, I was only going to find one of those, so I made a very simple app. And then the last thing it's doing is it's saying, create a target from that. This is no different from when you're in the UI and you're on the selection tab, you have a list of targets, you click the checkbox. That's all that we're doing right here. You see that that target is mapped up to a product instance. That's a new concept to talk about a little bit. The product instance is the OS and architecture, the OS platform that you were seeing in the summary pane. Every target exists under an OS and architecture. Then the last thing that we did in the demos is we scheduled our tests. And that's exactly what's happening with this piece of code. You can see that I'm searching for a test by name because I happen to know the name of the test that I want to run. And then I'm simply queuing up that test to run. It's simple and straightforward, just like picking the test from the test tab. I just check the box and I click Run Selected. So the automation infrastructure is very simple and straightforward. Let's take a look at the app. Okay, so here's my command window. And the name of my app, if I can remember, HCK hands-on lab. There's one parameter that I need to pass in, which is the name of the controller. I certainly could have hard-coded it for this particular demo since I only have one controller, but this particular app allows me to pick from a controller that I want to run on. I'll hit that, and if I typed it right, things will happen. Okay, so you can see that it has created a project, and if I switch back to the UI here, I think I should see that project created. There it is. Okay. It's appended it with a time and date stamp just so that I don't end up with projects that have multiple similar names or the same names. Just demo purposes. You could handle that in any number of different ways. So now we will continue with this. And you see it picking the target. I'm going to go ahead and close the UI here because we have a little refresh bug. And I need to do that in order for it to get the right data into the app. Once I've done that, I'll load up this project again. I can load that project by double-clicking on it or by selecting it and hitting this Load Project button up here. Notice once again that once I see the title up here, then I know that the project is loaded. So now if I move over to the Selection tab, I should see that keyboard is selected. Right? Again, no different from what I did through the UI. We continue on with this project. Now it's doing something that you hadn't seen before, or we kind of saw before. Remember when I listed out the features that were detected on a particular dev node in the project? That's what my application is doing here. It's just dumping these out. I wanted to do this to show you a concept. In addition to automating the process of scheduling jobs, creating projects, and so on, you can do a number of other things with your automation. I could conceive of somebody saying, hey, before I run a bunch of tests, I want to make sure that, in fact, the right features were detected on my device. Well, here I'm using the object model to get a list of features that were detected. Now it would be a simple operation for me to compare that against the list of what I expected and then take the appropriate action within my app at that point. That's just one way that you can use the automation to do more than just scheduling jobs. You can build some logic in here. That's why we have it available through C#. All right, so we'll continue on. It's going to run that test. The job is running, it says. So here's another example of something you can do within your automation. It's actually polling to see if the job is done. Right? So you can think of any number of things you might do as a result of that polling. And I don't think this test takes very long. It should be done shortly. We could probably flip over to the UI here and see that it's running. And in fact, it is running. And it looks like it's done. Yep, test is finished. Done. And you see that, in fact, it's finished. And the summary says it's done. Right? So that's just a quick introduction to automation. Obviously, there's a whole lot more that you can do with automation. It's difficult to demo for you, but I'll promise you it's complete. Everything that you need to do for logo testing or certification testing is available through this automation infrastructure. I know that automation isn't for everybody. There are some of you for whom this doesn't make sense. The UI probably makes a whole lot more sense for you. But if you do a lot of certification testing, even if you're a person that's in that middle group where you're doing certification testing more or less every day, you're probably doing a number of the same things repetitively over and over. And I would expect that writing some PowerShell scripts to do those things for you in a single click could save a lot of time for you. Okay. So up to this point, we've talked about what I think of as the core certification scenario, where you start with a product and you want to get that thing certified for Windows. And that's certainly important. We know, however, that there are other sort of non-core scenarios, such as using the driver update process. We know that you use the kit and the data from the kit to work with your partners to show that things are working, to diagnose problems. We know that you're using this kit to communicate with Microsoft product support about issues that you're having and to help to get assistance that way. So we know that these are important scenarios, and today you don't use the logo kit really to do that. You use various other tools. So we wanted to bring all those scenarios under one unified toolkit. and give you a complete solution. In that way, then, when you're talking to Microsoft CSS, when you're talking to your partner, they can use exactly the same application and see exactly what you're seeing, even though they're not connected to your controller. I'll give you a quick demo of how that's going to work. Here we go. So for those of you who took the time to go back to our lab earlier this week, you've seen all the demos we've done to this point. So this is your reward for showing up Friday morning, something that you haven't seen. There's a feature that was disabled in that lab. You may already have noticed it. There's this Connect tab up here, and I'm going to show you that in a moment. First of all, let's take a look at our projects and do a couple different things. I'm going to start with this printer project that we looked at earlier, and I'm going to package that up so it's ready to send to the hardware developer portal so that you can get that thing certified. Let's just assume that all those tests are complete and that they're all passing results. The first thing I need to do is add my driver to this thing. You do that simply by browsing to the folder where the driver exists. And I have put a sample driver here. Test driver, there it is. There's the 64-bit version of my driver. So I point at the folder, and the system assumes that whatever's in that folder is my complete driver package. And it's going to package that up and get it ready to go to the portal. You may, in fact, have different driver packages for different OS architecture platforms. I think you saw when I was browsing to the folder there that the x86 driver in this case is different from the x64 driver. This is the place where you tell the system which driver belongs to which OS platform. Right? So it's listing out the OS platforms that I've tested on and asking me which of these does the driver apply to. It's also listing out all of the targets. Right? So there eventually will be a select all button or checkbox, but for today I have to check each of these individually. I'm going to get an error. I'm getting this error because the driver that I'm including is actually an inbox driver. It's telling me that submitting a driver that's already on the Windows DVD doesn't make sense. But for demo purposes, we'll just ignore that. I would actually check all of those, but I don't want to deal with the Windows. This is where we indicate which locale our driver applies to. Many of you will have different driver builds that have localized information in the help files, or maybe they're branded differently for different locales. So this is the place where you indicate which locale your driver applies to. In most cases, you're probably just going to check that box up there at the top and say, yeah, it applies everywhere. Right. So once I'm done with that, I'll click this Create Package down at the bottom. I'm going to pick a location for my package. Let's just stick this one on the desktop. And we'll click Save. And that's all there is to it. Close this window so we can see it show up. Okay, so it's in the process now of gathering up all of the test logs and gathering up my driver that I pointed to and putting them all into a cab file that doesn't any longer have a 2 GB limit on it. Once you see this check mark here under signability, we know that the package has been created and everything's good. It's useful to know what signability is about. When you submit this package to Microsoft, there are two things that happen on the back end before we say, yeah, it's okay to certify this thing. The first set of processing is looking at the test results and determining, yep, did all the right tests run and did all the right tests pass and so on. The second thing is a set of checks, and frankly, I'm not totally familiar with all those checks because this tool is owned by a different team. But they're basically looking at the driver and saying, is this driver properly formatted, and doing various other checks on that. Those checks are all rolled into signability. So what we've done for you is put that signability tool into the kit so that you are running exactly the same thing that's going to happen on the back end before you ever go through that submission process. So in that way, if there's a problem, you get notified about it here, not 2 days later when we tell you, sorry, it didn't work. All right? So that's what's happening there. Okay, so recall that system demo that we did earlier. I'm going to load that one up. And recall that we had this failing result in there. And I really didn't know exactly what the issue was there. I'm just a PM, and I'm not an expert on this. As you guys may know, my team builds the infrastructure, the test automation that's here. And teams around Windows that are experts in different technology areas build the logo requirements and the tests that validate them. And so I happen to know that I got a friend who is an expert on system tests. His name is Paul Reed, and I think he could help me out. But my lab here is isolated. It's not on a network or anything. And Paul's in the building across the street. Since I'm kind of embarrassed that I don't know what to do here, I'm going to put it on a thumb drive so that he doesn't have to come over. And I'm going to walk it across the street to him and ask him for some assistance. So what I'll do is I'll go to the Package tab. I'm not going to add a driver because this is a system submission, and I'm just trying to figure out what happened with my particular test. Click Create Package. I'm going to choose this thumb drive, my Texas Instruments thumb drive that I got on the show floor earlier this week. And call it System Failure. Let's make sure that thing is there. There it is. Okay, good. So, I'm going to pull this out. I'm going to give this to Paul, walk across the street. And Paul, could you help me figure out what's going on there? Because
Sure, man. No problem.
I don't know how to read these test logs, and there's like hundreds and hundreds of pages of text, and I'm not really sure what to do, right? So you can imagine that Paul's across the street. You can imagine that Paul's around the world. I know for a fact from talking to all of you that most of the time, I believe now, certification testing is not happening in the place where your developers are. It's not happening in the place where your business people are. It's happening in some other part of the world in a different time zone, in a different language. So this is an important scenario for you. You need to be able to have your testers take the logs and the results and give them to somebody else who can analyze them and help them figure out what to do next. So, are you ready, Paul?
I'm ready whenever you are.
All right. Great. Let's see if we can show Paul's machine.
Yeah. Our smoke and mirrors didn't quite work, but that's okay.
Okay. So pretend this is Paul's machine. It's still the same machine we were using before. Paul's going to open this up by going to the Connect tab. And when he does that, he gets this dialog that allows him to browse to a package file. He'll simply browse to that file that's sitting on the removable disk and open it up. And when he does that, that system demo should load right up. I think it's already loaded. You might check the the project tab just to make sure.
Yep, there
looks like it's loaded up. And he can go to the test tab and see the same list of tests that I saw. He can go to the results tab and see the same results that I saw. And Paul, it's that system audio logo test that I'm concerned about. I can't figure out why that thing is failing.
Let's take a look. So we see the same user interface that you're used to before with the logs. So let's scroll down to the failure, and oh, dummy, you forgot to plug in the audio loopback cable.
Jeez. All right, so obviously a very staged scenario, but wanted to show, notice that he's looking at this and it looks exactly the same as it did when I was using it on the controller. And yes, it is the same machine, but if I took this thumb drive and gave it to somebody who had that client installed, and by the way, you will be able to install the client on any machine. It doesn't have to be installed just on something that's connected to the controller. You'll be able to view the data in my project exactly the way I was viewing it. Okay? Thanks, Paul.
Thanks, Craig.
Okay, so getting towards the end here, that was a set of demos, a lot of demos. Thanks for sticking with us through all of that. Again, I want to remind you, if you forget all the details about those features, try to remember two things as you walk out of the room today. The certification kit is about helping you deliver Windows hardware that fulfills or hopefully exceeds the expectations that your customers have. And we've worked really hard to provide you something that streamlines the certification process to make it fast, efficient, more direct, and hopefully even enjoyable. If I were in your seat right now, I probably would have one remaining thing in my head, and that is what's next. We're coming to the end of the conference. Obviously, there are two important opportunities that you can still take advantage of. As I mentioned a couple times before, the lab is in the back of Hall D. That's an opportunity to go do all of this yourself. There's a chalk talk at the end of the day, and if you have questions that don't get answered here, that's a great place to go try to answer those questions. If you don't already, you will soon have access to the same build of the kit that we're using here. I recommend that you go get that, you familiarize yourself with the features, and you ask that question that I recommended at the beginning. How do I use this kit to certify my device? And see if you can figure out how that works. I think you'll find that it's straightforward. Then at Windows Beta, there will be another release of the kit. This will be a public beta that's available to everybody. That's the time to kind of change that question in your head a little bit and ask, if I had to use this kit to certify my device, could I do it? And if there are any issues there at all, we need to know about them and work through them as rapidly as possible. Because the goal is, at Windows RC, to start certifying your devices. So at Windows RC, there will be another release of the kit. With that release, you will be able to start certifying your devices. And obviously, the reason why we do it early like that is so that when we get to GA, your products are sitting there on the shelf, certified and ready to be sold with Windows 8. There are not a lot of related sessions left that you can go to in person. However, if you haven't been to this Build Windows site, this is really cool. Every session that was here this week was recorded, and it's up there on the Build Windows site. You can search by speaker name. You can go and do a filter for all certification presentations. You're probably all going to spend some time on the airplane this afternoon. You can go and download the presentations. You can watch them on your Windows 8 PC. You can even download a format that works for Windows Phone. Or if you're hopelessly stuck in the past, you can download a format that works on iPods and iPhones. All right. So further information that you can go find later. And with that, thank you. I appreciate your time this morning. And I think we should have a little bit of time for questions if you guys like. If you have a question, would you move to the microphone, please, so that everybody can hear the question? Thanks.
Like this microphone?
Like that one right there.
Awesome. So for years and years, great presentation, by the way, thank you. For years and years, we've been asking for the ability to export standalone jobs. And from what I think I just heard you say, that functionality is now going to be present in Visual Studio for our devs to be able to use these packages outside the kit?
Yes and no. You're almost there. So we don't have the ability to, say, take a specific job out of the kit and export it to a format that somebody else could execute without all the infrastructure of the kit. However, we put many of the same tests into the driver kit. We put them in there with a very lightweight execution engine so that it's easy for those driver developers to execute those tests. So we're kind of there.
So kind of getting closer. So what would it take to get complete test content available for my devs so they can take advantage of the pre-test processes and set up tasks and stuff like that too?
We really believe that putting it in the driver kit in that lightweight test execution environment is the right way to go. We looked at a number of scenarios for making this system lighter weight so that it could support that scenario that you're talking about. And it just didn't make sense. It made more sense to give the developer a very lightweight environment and just put the tests in Visual Studio where they're already working. They're exactly the same tests. They should yield exactly the same results.
Right, okay. But you were saying that not every certification test is going to be available there.
That's right.
And so
there are some tests that in fact require the infrastructure that we have in the kit, and they just won't work without the kit.
Fair enough.
Yeah, unfortunately, in that particular instance, it's something where you're going to have to, go to a lab or set up an instance of the controller so that you can actually run the test.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Sure.
So I have a question from...
Sorry, I can't see. Oh, you're over here.
Over here. So Oscar commented in his presentation, someone had asked him a question about VTS, Velocity Test Suite.
Yes.
And about whether or not that was going to be retired, and his comment was that the Windows hardware certification kit and VTS are still going to be sort of complementary to each other, and I'm wondering if you can comment on that any further, and if you know if VTS is going to be updated as well.
What used to be known as Velocity is improved, and in the ADK, the Automated Deployment Kit, as assessments. And we're keeping those things separate because they have a different focus. The focus of those is about optimizing a system, whereas with certification, it's about making sure that scenarios work correctly. So they are separate. They do still both exist, but they're going to be in different kits for different scenarios.
Okay, and do you know is the schedule for the other kit, is it going to be similar to the certification kit?
Like 99% certain they're on exactly the same schedule as everybody else. Yeah.
Okay, thank you.
I have a question regarding automation. How is it?
I'm sorry, a question about?
About automation.
Automation, okay,
yeah,
yes.
How it is distributed? It's a DLL file that we can import to our project. How about documentation, and is it already available for us?
Not sure I understand.
So,
the question.
because we saw the code
Yes.
that we can use,
Yes.
but we saw some classes that we can reuse. So, is it a DLL file that
You're
we
getting
can...
a little bit out of my depth. Yeah. One of you guys want to answer that? Carl, Jacob? Or, sorry, Jacob, Dilesh?
So what you can do
You should probably step up to a microphone here. Let me introduce Dilesh. This is our dev lead.
there. Okay, so what you can do is when you install the studio that Craig's been demoing, you'll have those assemblies available. So you can bring them into Visual Studio and use the object browser and and have access to all the objects.
Okay, is it already available?
Yeah, with the install. So when you get the install, you'll be able to do this.
Thanks.
If you have further questions, I'll be at the Chalk Talk as well. We can.
Yeah, again, for those of you that you will all have access to the kit via Connect. It's not quite ready yet, the build that we have here today, but it should be by the end of the month, you'll be able to have access to that. It'll be the same build we demoed here today or newer. Yeah.
Hi, I have some questions around the packaging step.
Yes.
For one thing, signability. Currently, we manually we build the cab file, the package, manually sign it, and then upload it to WinQual.
Yep.
So is that signability step going to do that for us? And then my second question about that is the process of uploading it to WinQual going to change?
Yeah, good questions. The first one is, what about signing the package? And yeah, the name of the tool is a little bit misleading. Signability is about making sure that we can sign your driver with the Microsoft signature. But as most of you are probably aware, you also need to sign that package with your corporate signature before you send it to us, so that we know that, in fact, it came from you and not somebody pretending to be you. I'm not going to be able to answer your question right now, unfortunately. We are working on making that process better and integrating that into the kit, but I can't make you a promise at this point. I'd like to make it better. Worst case scenario, it still will be a matter of taking that package and using the sign tool that's in the driver kit to sign it before you upload it. Okay. And then the second question was, remind me.
About will the process change for uploading it?
Oh, yes, the process. The portal, the Hardware Development Center is changing, but the process of making a submission for hardware certification isn't significantly different. The UI is a little different, and has a different more modern feel. It has a Metro-ish feel, but the process is essentially the same.
And one more packaging question. The localization box that popped up.
Yeah.
And you selected all, but is that all localizations that exist, or all that it's detecting in your INF, or?
Those are all of the possible localizations that the portal understands.
And if, let's say you have 24 languages you want to support, will it remember if you check all of those, next time you do a submission?
No. Yeah. So
The current tool
that's
does.
local to the project. Once you start another project, it doesn't know that the driver is the same driver or the device is the same driver. I mean, I guess conceivably, Yeah, automation is a
Sure,
good way to do it.
yeah.
Conceivably, you could open an existing project and delete all the results out of there and start again, and then some of the data. But I wouldn't recommend
The
that.
current tool does remember, which can be a problem if you're changing to a different product and need to put
Yeah,
different
we should probably talk about
localizations.
that particular scenario outside or something where I
Okay.
can understand it better. The current tool is WST, of course, and I
Right.
think you're thinking about a driver update scenario.
No.
No?
No, it just
Okay.
anytime you do
Okay.
submission.
All right, let's talk afterwards, and you can explain that to me in a little more detail, and we can think about what might work there.
Just real quick, you're talking about this chalk talk. Is
Yes.
that the session at 2?
2 o'clock
Number
today, that's right. I think
665?
it's like over in the Marriott Hotel.
All right,
Yeah.
fantastic.
There will be folks from the logo program, both the hardware and the software side there.
David Edfeld's talk?
Yeah,
Perfect. We'll get you then, too.
excellent. Yeah,
It seems you're also replacing the WinQual submission tool with this.
yes, we are.
I
The
didn't
WinQual
see
submission tool completely goes away.
Excellent. I didn't see a way to add a README file in this GUI.
There is. I suggest you come back to the lab and we can show you. It's not called out explicitly. It's like, if I recall the UI, it's additional files or something along those lines. That's where you would add a README. Let's see if we can find it real quick. Oops, I guess we've turned that off? No, okay. So there is add supplemental folder here. What you would do is just, if you have a README, symbol files, any other files that need to go up with your submission, dump them into a folder, point the packager at that folder, and it'll take care of that for you. We made it kind of generic because there are a number of different types of files that would be added to a submission in addition to a README, and they all had the same requirements, so we just made a generic way to add files to a submission. Yeah.
On the issue of erratas that are needed to get some system submissions done, it's always hard to find the ones that expired. Is there a way of having the erratas be listed, the currently the current in use ones and the ones that have passed their prime, but you need to reactivate them?
Erratas are always a difficult question. There's nothing here within our UI that's going to do that for you. I want to ask you to bring that question to the Chalk Talk when we have all the right people in the room. If you can't, we can do it over email or something. Because there's erratas and contingencies, and as you know, there's filters. One of the things we've done in the new kit is filters are applied real time. They're applied as results arrive on the controller. So up here in this example where you're seeing that summary pane, those pass and fail results are the results after errata filters have been applied. You don't need to go click some separate button to see that. But errata questions are always complex, and I don't want to answer them right here on the stage without some support. So please bring it either to the lab or to the Chalk Talk, one or the other.
Okay, thanks.
Somebody else? Yeah.
For the automations, so if I just select in the UI side, then can I export to a file, then I can make some change modification, don't do from the beginning.
I'm not sure I understand the
Just
question.
select in
Once
the
you
UI.
export to a package,
Yes.
that's a read-only situation.
I just say that I can select make a test in the UI, I select something, and also I can make the automation, make some programming. So can I just from the selection finish the test, and I can export the total selections file to maybe to automation file, and I just make some modifications. Not from the beginning to, okay, I just make a program to add the project, something like that.
I think the answer is yes, but let's talk afterwards and make sure that I understand what you're talking about. I see that time says we are out of time. I'm happy to hang out with you guys and ask questions outside, or we can go to the lab and do it. I hope to see you this afternoon if you're hanging around to the end. Thank you guys, I appreciate it.